I'm talking about Clearing New Path podcast, and I'm going to start by saying how I started it, just briefly. Uh, Back in, I want to say the fall of 2021. I think it was 2021, the fall of 2021. During the pandemic, I worked at a provincial organization in Ontario that was providing support to offices that in turn supported rural entrepreneurs across Ontario at the time, but also we were planning a big national conference. So collecting stories from entrepreneurs across rural Canada was part of my job. And I felt like the stories of folks who weren't white men were a box check. So, do we have a woman? Yes. Do we have a queer business? Do we have an immigrant run business? And it felt inauthentic that simply ensuring that they had check boxes for their funding and not actually seeking out folks to help and support and promoting that felt disingenuous to me. Um, I am a former broadcaster. I worked as a radio journalist, a reporter, a newscaster, and I hosted a radio call-in talk show. I did that for 10 years here in Ontario, again, in a medium-sized city. I started the podcast because I wanted to facilitate conversation, but also share the stories, amplify folks who typically you wouldn't hear from them unless, from mainstream media, shall we say. And so I started that podcast. I had a sponsor, a rural internet provider. I did that for 2 seasons, 80 episodes. The first season was women identifying non-binary and queer entrepreneurs in rural Canada. The second season, in between the first and second season and the beginning, I guess, of the second season, the convoy happened, the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa. And I felt like there were other issues that rural folks were concerned with and talking about and were important. And so I switched gears a little bit. And so after those 2 seasons, I did 80 episodes total, talking about things that I thought were provocative, that were, "Hi, April, good to see you." Um, and yeah, and I got to talk about, some of the challenges women identifying non-binary and queer entrepreneurs in rural Canada, particularly women of color, um, faced. I also enlisted some help from Venture for Canada and some amazing post-secondary students. We worked on a report card of Canada's Chambers of Commerce, all 400 plus of them. And we looked at their inclusivity practices. And the students came up with the criteria and how to grade them, and they all failed miserably. And no surprise. And also not a surprise was that the chambers really didn't want to know about this, you know, information. Anyway, so I have sputtered along with this podcast and newsletter. I have, done it weekly. I did it weekly for a while for the first 2 years, and then I started to get burnt out. I have not, since losing the sponsor, I have not made money from it, but I always have thought and felt that it was important. I live in a rural community. I have a vested interest in what happens in rural Canada, and I don't see a lot of focus on rural Canada, and I put myself in positions where I needed to learn, needed to embrace my privilege, the position that I hold simply by the way that I look. I have seen it over and over again that, I apply for funding or I go into a meeting and I go into a meeting with perhaps representing or with a person of color, a woman of color, and I'm the one who gets the attention, who gets trust immediately. I think that a lot of women my age, and I am a Gen Xer, I think a lot of young folks have given up on us, and perhaps rightly so, particularly we white women. We have, and I say we, me, I have been complicit. I could be so much louder. I could amplify and speak so much louder, be less neutral, less polite. And I have done those things quietly, without fanfare. I sit on community committees. I live in a community that is very tight knit and very ingrained in its legacy. So, folks that have lived there their entire lives, it's difficult to break in. However, there are some amazing folks everywhere in every community. And I just feel called to be louder. I feel called to be more vulnerable about patriarchy, white supremacy, colonization, all of the systems that we live under and continue to perpetuate. I'm part of that. I have a long history of that. I come from white parents. I come from Irish, Scottish, Celtic parents. I have lived with privilege my entire life. Lived my whole life in Canada. I was born here, born into a white family, and it's time that I use my privilege more, and I feel called to do that. I don't know what that looks like. I'm gonna be really vulnerable. I will say that I have spent probably the last year and a half, maybe 2 years healing, healing from the intergenerational trauma that I have experienced at the hands of, my own family and my own oppression. And I've been really vulnerable about that. I have tried to mask my anxiety. I've had great anxiety. I think I've lived with anxiety almost my entire life. I have been brave for sure. I have showed courage. I don't want to minimize that. However, I can be braver and louder. And the podcast moving forward and the newsletter and anything associated with it will not be neutral. I believe in human rights. I believe in queer rights. I believe in trans rights. I believe in the rights of people of color. I believe that Canada is a place for all of us, and I will not argue those things. And so I'm happy to have open discussions with folks. Happy to have civil conversations. But this is a rule that I had when I was a talk show host that you can argue my point. You can argue what point I'm trying to make. You can argue, with what I'm saying, the material of that. But once you criticize me as a person personally without knowing who I am, our conversation ends. And I think that's an important boundary for anyone. I think I have tried to be open and really, you know, I believe everyone can heal. If I can, anyone can. But I also believe in self-respect, and I believe in boundaries. And as a woman, I have been complicit in accepting crumbs. Many of us have. And I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm not asking for any of that. I am awakening. I am always learning. I am always searching for truth. What is my truth? What do I feel is true in this moment? And I will attempt to be consistent with the interviews and the essays and the information that I'm sharing. However, I have to trust my body. My personal sovereignty, my personal responsibility comes first. And I think that that's an important thing to model. We live in a world where we think we have to prove ourselves to everyone. We think we have to level up. We have to, push. We have to initiate. We have to push, 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 until we're exhausted. Uh, and we have sovereignty. We have choice. We don't have to choose to do that. Just like I don't have to choose to wear tons of makeup anymore like I used to. I don't have to choose to, be constantly working. I can go for a walk on a sunny day in my conservation area with my dog because that's what I choose to do. Yes, that is a privilege. And so finding the balance between keeping my personal sovereignty and my joy and my creativity, my divine feminine, but also really putting myself out there and being loud, and being vulnerable and able to admit that I have been complicit and that I don't have it right all the time and that I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on the lived experience of people of color, of a queer person, a trans person, a person who's a mom. I don't have that expertise. I don't have that lived experience. But what I do know is I can use my privilege and my power to draw attention to the tension, whatever that may be, and then out of the way so that other people's voices can be heard. I've always felt in my soul that that was my job, was to facilitate conversation, not pontificate and tell people how to live. That is not my job. But what I can do is draw your attention to things that I'm noticing, things that I'm feeling, things that I'm living and grappling with. I'm angry about what's happening in the world. I'm confused. I'm not sure what my place is sometimes. And I know that it's important for me to ground. I know it's important for me to come back to myself and to know who I am and what I stand for. And I don't want there to be any question about what this podcast and this newsletter stand for. And I've already lost subscribers, and that's okay. Y'all will find me. Y'all will find me. My people will find me. And we will create community. I think it's important for we folks living in rural communities in rural Canada to organize again, to love our neighbors, to get to know our neighbors, to pitch in, to volunteer, to not be afraid of folks simply because of what we think we know about them. It's it takes bravery, it takes courage, and I'm afraid. I'm scared for sure. But it's going to be too late. We really have to come together. It's the most important thing is for us to come together. And I haven't got it all figured out. I don't know what that looks like. I know that there are folks that I'm going to be talking to, though. And this Friday, 2 days from now, I'll be talking to a young woman who is just graduating from journalism school in Alberta. And she's questioning, like, what is my future? What is the future of my, career? She wants to amplify voices just like me, but she doesn't know where her place is. And I think that that's so important for us to know. Young folks are different than we were. They've grown up in a completely different world. And so, how do we support them? How do we amplify them? How do we use the power and privilege that we have to help? And I think that's it. I will say that any interviews or sessions that I start, I will probably start with some deep breaths because that is not only for all y'all, but it's also for me. It helps me ground. It helps me feel connected. And I think that's the most important thing for me right now. I don't know what tomorrow brings. As you know, things are changing so quickly, so rapidly. And I just have to get up each day and think, okay, what do we do today? What's the most important true thing today? And that's how it'll go. So I have a live planned for Friday with Aaron. Uh, we'll be recording it and we shall see you soon. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to send this out to everyone on the subscriber list. And thank you, those of you that are live here. I appreciate you so much. And we'll keep going deeper because we have to. We have to connect. And I miss that. I really miss that. So I will see you again soon. Bye for now.